Well, another topic dominating Parliament Hill today, the cost of groceries.
Prime Minister had a chance to lower grocery bills by removing the carbon tax on farmers. But once again, he proved he is not worth the cost.
But you know who is driving up prices? Vladimir Putin. He's driving up the price of fuel and of food.
So while politicians spar over who or what is to blame for high food prices, we learned today those prices will likely continue to rise in 2024, at least according to an annual report on grocery costs. The average family of four is expected to pay $700 more for groceries over the next year, with prices continuing to be pushed up by interest rates, energy costs, and wars overseas and climate change. Meanwhile, the opposition is threatening to filibuster the House of Commons until there's a carbon tax carve-out on farm heating, which they say will make food more affordable. For more on the issue of food pricing, I'm joined by food economist at the University of Guelph, Mike von Massow. Professor, welcome back to the show.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so this warning from the report released by the Agri-Food Analytics Lab at Dalhousie University, a lot of factors go into this. $700 for a family of four is nothing to sneeze at. In your view, what are the main drivers of food inflation?
Well, food inflation is different from general inflation. Food inflation is generally driven by supply side factors rather than demand side factors. So if you look at what's happened in the past few years, the war in Ukraine, the last year we've had a lower Canadian dollar, which makes imports, particularly in the winter, more expensive. Freights become more expensive. We've seen a bunch of extreme weather events that have affected the amount of food available. So we've had and there are other things. We've had this sort of perfect storm. We usually have sort of a 1.5% to 2.5% increase in food prices, just like general inflation. And that happens when individual things go up. We have, if you remember a few years ago, we had $10 cauliflower because of frost in California. This time we've just had everything go up simultaneously. So I think I would agree. I'm probably a little more optimistic than the Dalhousie report, and would probably be in the 1.5% to 3% range. But again, it's hard to predict a war. It's hard to predict an extreme weather event. I think the thing that's most predictable is unpredictability, and we'll see much more variability coming.
Okay, I like your prediction better, by the way, as someone who is from a family of four. But what you're laying out there is complexity, and what we're kind of getting in the political arguments about what's making groceries more expensive is a little bit of simplicity, people pointing at one particular thing. So I want to go through some of those if I can with you, Professor, like the carbon tax. Right now there's a filibuster happening in Parliament to take the carbon tax off a bunch of things. If you got rid of carbon pricing, would that make a massive difference to the point that people would know?
No, the evidence is pretty clear. I and others have said that the carbon tax might decrease food price. Getting rid of the carbon tax might decrease food prices a little bit, but it wouldn't be substantial, and that's borne out by a variety of organizations, including the Bank of Canada, Statistics Canada, and other commentators have said the same thing. I think the other important thing to remember relative to the carbon tax is that most households are getting carbon tax back, and in fact, that if we got rid of the carbon tax, more than half of Canadian households, particularly low-income Canadian households, would actually be worse off because they wouldn't be paying it anymore, but they wouldn't be getting the payments back. And the whole idea of the carbon tax is to change our behavior. That's why most people are getting money back.
Right. Okay. Now, there are certain exceptions to that. Obviously, Quebec with the cap-and-trade system, BC with the provincial-run system, but certainly Ontario, the prairies, and some of the Atlantic provinces. Okay. But what about specific carve-outs? Because there's a piece of legislation working its way through the Senate that's been bounced back and forth, Bill C-234, which is about exempting fuels used for grain drying and burn heating and things like this on farms from carbon pricing. The argument for people behind that is if you give farmers a break on their costs, it'll be passed along to you when you buy your groceries. Is it as simple as that? What impact could that have?
I don't think it would be as simple as that. I think if you look for many of these commodities, we compete in an international market and we're price takers for these commodities. So if we gave the farmers a carve out, might it have a very small impact on food prices? Perhaps, but the impact really is on incomes and predictability for farmers. And so again, as I said before, the carbon tax is intended to change behavior, not be a revenue generator. And for most of these farmers who are drying grain or heating barns, they don't have a good alternative. And so it's not going to change behavior. It's just going to cost them money. So it won't achieve the environmental objectives. So I think if we want to make this effective, perhaps we need to say, well, in 10 years, we're going to reinstitute the carbon tax and give them some time to adapt.
Right, which is similar to the approach with the carve out for home heating oil, for example, that you've got a 3-year window to get on a heat pump to avoid paying that cost going forward. Similar principle.
Exactly the same principle. And if you look, that agriculture is already exempt for diesel fuel and gasoline used in farms. Most of these barns and grain dryers are heated with natural gas. So part of it is just the agriculture arguing we should be consistent here.
Right. Okay, so on the other side of the coin, we have the New Democrats who are arguing that greedflation is driving this, that excess profit taking by the big grocery store companies and the food chains, Costco, Loblaws, and others. That's what's driving this, and they've dragged Galen Weston in front of the committee a couple of times on this point. Do you believe that it's excess profit taking by the grocery stores that's causing the spike in our food baskets?
Greedflation is not contributing significantly to inflation at all, if at all. And if you look at, yes, profits are increasing, partly because prices are going up, but the percent, so the absolute value is going up. But if you look at the percentage of profits relative to top line sales, those have not changed substantially. So there's not been a substantial change in behavior since we've seen this inflation. And you know, while I don't agree with everything that Galen Weston has said, I do think he has a valid point. Whereas if you look at the percentage of sales that all of that profits represent, even if grocery stores made $0, we still would have had positive inflation in the last couple of years. And so grocery stores are not contributing significantly to the prices we've had. And I'll go back to what I was saying before. War in Ukraine, extreme weather events, Canadian dollar, and on and on and on.
Okay, so Galen Weston, though, is here in Ottawa today, is before a parliamentary committee today, and one of the things the politicians are pushing for is a grocery code of conduct that they say they want them to sign on to. He says he can't do it because he argues the requirements under the grocery code of conduct would limit their abilities to deal with suppliers in a way that's beneficial for them and would actually be inflationary and could drive up costs for about $1 billion. What do you make of that argument?
I think to a degree he's right. I think he's being a little disingenuous when he says it, though, unfortunately. So if you look, what a grocery code of conduct is intended to do is set parameters around what grocers can ask their suppliers for. And we heard Galen Weston in his last testimony say, we've refused to accept some price increases that our suppliers have tried to implement, and we have all of these other fees. So if we control their ability to extract concessions from their suppliers, it means that the large players will have lower profits because they'll be able to take less from suppliers. Right. But if you look on the other side, they're still competing with the smaller players. So we heard Michael Medline from Empire Group earlier this week say, bring it on, we think it's a good idea, and they don't think it's inflationary. So if Loblaws get squeezed, they will either lose some profits or they will increase prices. And I think that's why Galen Weston is arguing it's inflationary. But they can only increase prices if everybody does it. And so if Empire Group is saying, well, we're not taking a whole lot from our suppliers, or we're at least taking less, so if we control that, it will probably be largely absorbed by Loblaws themselves. But I would agree with Mr. Weston and say it's unlikely to reduce prices, but it may increase prices somewhat depending on the competitive landscape of other grocers. And given what Empire Group is saying, I would guess it won't be as inflationary as the big players who have the most to lose from a grocery code of conduct are arguing.
Okay, I have one final question, because it sounds to me all the issues I've raised with you are the issues the politicians raise as a solution to high food prices, and you don't believe they're actually contributing in a massive way. So are they focusing on the wrong things? I mean, what could politicians at the federal level focus on to actually help food prices go down? Or is this just something that's global and they can't control it?
Well, I think it's exactly right, David, is that these are supply side issues. The government is getting blamed for things that they aren't doing. Now, in fairness, they often take credit for things that they haven't done either. And,
this is true.
So the government cannot control the war in Ukraine. The government cannot make it stop raining when it's flooding in California. The government can't make it rain in the West when we're experiencing drought. So many of these things are just unfortunate reality that are all happening at the same time. Now, we expect some of those things to happen, and going forward, hopefully we'll spread those things out a little bit more. But fundamentally, because these are mostly supply side issues, the government can't do much other than what it did in the summer, which was giving low-income Canadians direct cash payments as a way of buffering these higher prices. But they can't do much to bring them down.
Mike von Massow, food economist at the University of Guelph. Thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.